Just, in terms of what I want to say about the State House as a whole, it's an honor to work in such a beautiful historic building. I try to, and as one who likes history, I try to, stop and reflect and think about, some of the people that have been through the building, that served in the building, how they conduct themselves. One of the things I have that's a pet peeve, and I've had discussions with the Senate President, even in the short time I've been here, I've seen breakdown in decorum. Now, in my personal life, you won't find, a more low-key, relaxed person. I'm not known. People see me around town in a pair of jeans and T-shirt a lot. I don't particularly get excited about fancy wardrobes, things like that. Like I said, I'm the only person that comes to work on a motorcycle. You don't see me on that motorcycle in a three-piece suit. I'm usually in a pair of jeans. I'll change in my office. But I do take the decorum, the history, the protocol of the building seriously, and I've seen a real change that troubles me. Some of the younger members that come in get, here I am sounding like an old fuddy-dud now, but new members of the Senate come in and get exposed to that and think that's the way it is. And there's a continual breakdown in decorum. And I, got to give Senate President Bulger credit for one thing. He took that also seriously. There were dress codes for people who, came into the chamber. You couldn't walk in with a, bottle of water or eating a candy bar. I mean, there's a tradition there that was important to him. And I've seen slippage in that, and that bothers me. Well, we're not able to go into the Senate chamber because we are in the last day of the legislative session. There's an informal session going on, and obviously cameras aren't allowed in under those circumstances. And we're finishing up last-minute legislation, a lot of non-controversial bills, home rule petitions that are making its way through the process. Here on the last day of the session, the new legislature gets sworn in tomorrow, which I think is why you see these chairs stacked up. There'll be a lot of temporary chairs in the Senate chamber for family members that are coming in, especially first-time senators that are getting sworn in. There'll be a lot of those. We've had some turnover this year due to some retirements and some indictments. This room we're in now is actually the former Senate chamber. This was the Senate chamber from the time that the building was constructed in 1798 to for about 100 years, roughly. And some of the portraits on the wall, all but one actually, are of former Senate presidents. And certainly the most notable would be Calvin Coolidge, off to your left. And that's one of only 2 full-length portraits in the entire State House. A lot of paintings, a lot of portraits, but only 2 full-length portraits in the building. And there's one exception in the room. It was the Senate Minority Leader, who was a Republican, John Parker. He served for about 22 years, and they made an exception. They felt bad for him because if the Republicans had ever taken control of the Senate, he most likely would have become the Senate president. And of course, we have 2 portraits that were recently placed here, all in about the last year and a half. Former Senate President Bill Bulger, his portrait was placed here. I think that's a very realistic portrait and well done. To the left of that is the most recent portrait that was hung in this room, and that was the most recent Senate president to leave, Senator Bob Travellini. And I don't think that one is particularly well done in terms of capturing the person I knew in Senator Travellini. That to me looks like Tony Curtis. So he's been taking a little ribbing that there's a resemblance to Tony Curtis. It's not bad. I mean, make no mistake, I don't want to insult the artist who captured that, but I think the Bulger one, it's a different style. The Bulger one, it's obviously more resembles like a photograph type thing, less of some impressionist colors, but it's realistic. I think they did a great job capturing, because I served a year and a half under Bulger, and that captures the way I remember him, as opposed to the Travellini portrait doesn't really capture Travellini as I remember him. Of course, the guy with the most incredible resume of anyone that served as Senate president has to be Henry Wilson. He was a member of the House of Representatives with number of split terms. He did 1841 and 42, then he was out, then he went back in 46, and then went out and back in 50. Kind of an ironic, interesting tenure there. And he was a member of the Senate in between many of those years, 1844 to 1845, then he was 1851 to 1852. Split. So he went in the House, back to the Senate, back to the House, back to the Senate. I don't know what the circumstances were surrounding that. He was president of the Senate 1851, 1852, went on to become United States Senator representing Massachusetts from 1855 to 1873. So he had a long tenure as a U.S. Senator. And then he served as Vice President in 1872. So we've had some people that have gone on from this body to significant positions in Washington, most notably, again, Calvin Coolidge, who went on to serve as President of the United States. So this is the view from the balcony on the front of the building that everybody's familiar with. The view from Beacon Street where you see the Golden Dome. And of course, the building was built, the State House was built on land donated to the state by John Hancock, and it overlooks the Boston Common. And to give you an idea, back in the old days when the building was first built, until the addition, the first major addition, which was 1888 roughly, 1898, excuse me, the building was rather compact. You had, if you're facing the building, the Senate chamber to the right, the House chamber in the center, and the governor's office off to the left, and all were connected. And basically you could reach all three via this balcony. And that all changed about 1898 when the large addition was put on. So if we were to go down here to the right, we could actually peek in the window and see if Governor Patrick is at his desk working, but I think we will refrain from doing that today because he's probably rather busy. But a great view here, nice place to step out if they were having a late night session up here or a session into the evening to catch a breath of fresh air. Beautiful view of the city, skyline. And occasionally we see some rallies out front, some protesters out front, or usually some activity down here. It's pretty quiet out here today on this January day. But it is a beautiful building, and unfortunately, not being able to view from the floor today, the Senate chamber is the oldest legislative chamber in the Western Hemisphere. So a significant amount of history has occurred in that room over the decades and centuries now. A lot of the towns in my district are closer in terms of demographics than other senators' districts. Other senators, for instance, there's a district to the north of me which will include a good-sized city like Quincy and also include some smaller suburban communities like Rockland or Hanover in with Quincy. My communities are closer together in terms of the makeup. But, there's still within my district, there's some distinctions. You have certainly Weymouth and Hull. Hull's changing, but Weymouth and Hull and maybe Marshfield, for instance, are more blue-collar oriented communities than, say, Hingham and Cohasset right now. So you have a distinction that way, and maybe in terms of median incomes. But a lot of the issues in those towns are similar. Education, that's concerned to everybody, and funding of education, and transportation issues, for instance. Those are all communal in nature on the South Shore. The other distinction might be, that you have some communities, Hingham, for instance, doing really well in terms of tax revenue with all the new growth in the town. Derby shops, Hingham Shipyard redevelopment, a few others, Linden Ponds, all things that have benefited the town in terms of its tax growth. Whereas you get Weymouth, which, it is a struggle for us in terms of revenues, and to maintain the level of services that we have to maintain in the town with diminished state aid and some of the other problems in this economic downturn that Weymouth faces. So it's more of a struggle for Weymouth right now in this downturn than some of the other communities I represent, so that keeps us a little more focused from our perspective here on Beacon Hill for the needs of Weymouth, really.